A billionaire grabbed my wrist, looked at the scars I've had my entire life, and said 5 words that destroyed everything I thought I knew about myself. "I watched you get those." I stood there in his mansion, surrounded by people worth more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes, with shattered porcelain at my feet and my catering uniform stained with champagne. I was supposed to be invisible that night. I was supposed to wash dishes, carry trays, collect my paycheck, and go home to my 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus. Instead, I was staring into the eyes of a man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. And maybe he had. Because according to everything he told me that night, I'd been dead for 27 years. My name is Declan Morse. At least, that's the name I grew up with. That's the name on my driver's license, my social security card, my employee badge at Granger Furniture Distribution, where I've worked for the past 6 years. It's the name Pauline Decker called me when she took me into her home as a scared 7-year-old foster kid with no memories of where I came from, and scars on my hands that nobody could explain. But that night at the Ashby estate, I learned that Declan Morse might not be my real name at all. I learned that the scars I've carried since before I could remember weren't random. They weren't an accident. They were evidence of a night that tore a family apart and sent me into a life I was never supposed to live. Theron Ashby is not the kind of man you see on magazine covers or cable news. He doesn't chase attention. He built Ashby Industrial Holdings into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest, and then he disappeared behind the walls of his estate and let his money speak for itself. He hosts one private gathering a year for business associates and old friends. No press, no cameras, just wealthy people drinking expensive wine and pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist. I was there to wash their glasses. That's it. $50 an hour plus tips, which I was saving for HVAC certification courses because I wanted a trade, something stable, something that could give me a future beyond loading furniture trucks until my back gave out. I never expected to leave that party with a father. Here's what you need to understand about me before I tell you the rest of this story. I grew up with nothing. Not nothing like we couldn't afford vacations. Nothing. I mean nothing like I don't know my own birthday, nothing. I was found at a fire station in rural Pennsylvania when I was approximately 2 years old. No note, no name. No mother waiting in the parking lot to see if someone would take me in. Just a silent toddler with bandages wrapped around both hands and burns so severe that doctors said I'd carry the scars forever. They were right about that. I've looked at these hands every single day of my life. Thick, rippled scar tissue covering my palms and the backs of my fingers. The skin is tight in places, discolored in others. When I was a kid, other children would stare. Some would ask if I was contagious. Teachers would wince when they saw me raise my hand in class. I learned early to keep them in my pockets, to avoid handshakes when possible, to deflect questions with a shrug and a simple, "I was in an accident when I was little." But that was a lie. I didn't know if it was an accident. I didn't know anything. The social workers guessed. The doctors theorized. Nobody actually knew how a toddler ended up with burns like mine, alone at a fire station, with no one coming to claim him. I used to dream about it. Not the fire itself, because I don't remember that. I'd dream about a woman's voice calling my name. Except in the dream, she wasn't calling me Declan. She was calling me something else. Something I could never quite hear, and I'd wake up reaching for her with these scarred hands, grasping at nothing. For 27 years, that's all I had. Dreams that faded by morning and questions that nobody could answer. Then I broke a $12,000 vase at a billionaire's party, and the man who owned it didn't yell at me. He didn't threaten to sue. He didn't demand I be fired. He looked at my hands like he recognized them, like he'd been waiting to see them again. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of his antique porcelain with 100 guests staring at me, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child, waiting for someone to pick me up from the fire station. I felt like someone was finally coming for me. What happened next changed my life in ways I still don't fully understand. It gave me answers I'd stopped hoping for. It gave me a father I never knew existed. And it forced me to confront a truth about my mother that was more painful than any scar she left on my hands. This is the story of how I went from being nobody's son to discovering I was the missing heir to a fortune. But more than that, it's the story of how I learned that the scars we carry aren't just damage. They're proof that we survived, and sometimes, if we're lucky, they're the map that leads us home. The morning before everything changed, I woke up at 5:30 like I always did. My apartment was cold because I kept the thermostat at 62 to save money. I made instant coffee, ate a bowl of cereal standing over the sink, and drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic to Granger Furniture Distribution, where I'd worked since I was 23. That was my life. Not glamorous, not exciting, but mine. I supervised a team of 8 guys on the loading dock. We moved sofas, bed frames, dining tables, anything that came through on the trucks headed to retail stores across Ohio and Indiana. The work was physical and repetitive, but I didn't mind it. There's something honest about loading a truck. You start with an empty trailer, you fill it with product, you send it on its way. At the end of the day, you can see exactly what you accomplished. No ambiguity, no politics, just work. My coworkers knew me as the quiet one. I showed up on time, did my job, helped when someone needed a hand, and kept my personal life to myself. Most of them had families to go home to, wives, kids, mortgages, weekend soccer games. I had my apartment, my savings account, and my plan to get certified in HVAC repair so I could eventually move into something with better hours and benefits. That's the thing about growing up in foster care. You learn early that nobody is going to hand you anything. Every good thing in your life, you build yourself. Every safety net you weave with your own hands. I had no inheritance coming, no family business to fall back on, no parents who could co-sign a loan or let me crash in their basement while I figured things out. Everything I had, I earned. I'm not saying this for sympathy, I'm saying it because you need to understand who I was before I walked into that mansion. I was a guy who had made peace with his limitations. I knew where I came from, which was nowhere. I knew who my family was, which was almost no one. And I had stopped asking the questions that used to keep me awake at night. Almost stopped, anyway. The one person who came close to being family was Pauline Decker. She fostered me from age 7 until I aged out of the system at 18, and she never stopped being part of my life even after the state stopped paying her to keep me. Pauline was a retired cafeteria worker living on Social Security in a small house outside Zanesville. She had fostered more than 30 kids over the years, but she always said I was the one who stuck. I visited her every other Sunday. We'd sit on her porch if the weather was nice, or in her cramped living room if it wasn't, and she'd ask about my job and my love life and whether I was eating enough vegetables. She worried about me the way mothers worry, even though she'd never officially been mine. One Sunday, about a month before the party, I asked her something I hadn't asked in years. Do you ever wonder about them? My real parents? Pauline set down her coffee cup and looked at me with those sharp brown eyes that always saw more than I wanted to show. I used to, she said. When you first came to me, I used to imagine all sorts of stories. Maybe they were young and scared. Maybe something terrible happened and they couldn't take care of you. Maybe they were looking for you somewhere and just couldn't find you. And now? She reached over and patted my scarred hand. She was one of the few people who never flinched when she touched them. Now, I think some questions don't have answers, Declan, and some answers won't give you peace. You have to build your own peace. I nodded like I agreed. But that night, alone in my apartment, I stared at my hands for a long time. The scars were part of me in a way nothing else was. They were the only thing I had from before. The only physical proof that my life existed before that fire, stationed in Pennsylvania. Somewhere, someone knew how I got them. Somewhere, someone remembered the fire that marked me. And even though I told myself I'd stopped searching, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I'd just gotten better at hiding the search, even from myself. The catering gig came through the following week. A staffing agency I'd signed up with 6 months earlier called with an offer. Private event at a lakeside estate. 1 night of work. $50 an hour plus a share of tips. I did the math and said yes immediately. I didn't ask whose estate, I didn't ask what kind of party. I just saw the dollar signs and thought about how many more HVAC study guides I could buy. Looking back, I wonder if there was something else pulling me toward that mansion. Some force I don't have a name for, drawing me toward the answers I'd convinced myself I didn't need. Or maybe that's just the story I tell myself now. Because the alternative is accepting that the most important night of my life happened by pure random chance. Either way, on the second Saturday of October, I ironed my white catering shirt, polished my black shoes, and drove 2 hours north to the Ashby estate. I had no idea that the man who owned it had been searching for me since the night I disappeared. The Ashby estate looked like something from a movie I couldn't afford to watch in theaters. I pulled my Honda onto a private road lined with oak trees so old they formed a canopy overhead, blocking out the evening sky. When the trees finally opened up, I saw the mansion rising from the landscape like it had grown there organically. Stone walls, tall windows glowing with warm light. A circular driveway where valets in crisp uniforms collected keys from guests driving cars that cost more than my annual salary. I parked in the staff area behind the service entrance and sat in my car for a moment just looking. This was not my world. These were not my people. I was here to wash dishes and disappear, and that was fine. I'd gotten comfortable being invisible a long time ago. The catering manager was a woman named Donna, who spoke in rapid-fire instructions and barely made eye contact. She handed me an apron, pointed me toward the auxiliary kitchen, and told me the only rule that mattered. Do not speak to guests unless spoken to, and even then, keep it brief. Mr. Ashby values discretion, she said. No photographs, no personal conversations. You're part of the background tonight. Understood? I understood perfectly. Being part of the background was my specialty. For the first 2 hours, everything went smoothly. I stationed myself at a large sink in the side kitchen, scrubbing champagne flutes and appetizer plates, while uniformed servers moved in and out with loaded trays. The noise from the party was muffled but constant. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversations about things I would never understand. Stock portfolios, European vacations, someone's daughter, getting accepted to Yale. Around 9 o'clock, Donna appeared and asked me to help with tray service. They were short-staffed, and the main courses were about to go out. I dried my hands, grabbed a tray of empty flutes that needed collecting from the main hall, and stepped into the party. The room was enormous. Vaulted ceilings, oil paintings in gilded frames, furniture that looked older than the country. Guests clustered in small groups, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my car. I kept my eyes down and moved along the perimeter, collecting abandoned glasses and trying to take up as little space as possible. That's when I saw the vase. It sat on a marble pedestal near the hallway entrance, pale blue ceramic with gold detailing around the rim. Even from a distance, I could tell it was old and expensive, the kind of thing museums put behind velvet ropes. I gave it a wide berth and continued toward a cluster of empty glasses on a side table. I was almost past the pedestal when a guest stepped backward without looking. His elbow caught my arm. The tray tilted. I tried to correct, pivoting my weight, but my hip connected with the pedestal. Time slowed down the way it does in moments of absolute disaster. The vase wobbled. I reached for it with my free hand, but the tray was already falling, glasses sliding toward the floor. My fingers grazed the ceramic surface just as it tipped past the point of no return. The crash was spectacular. Crystal flutes shattered against the marble. The vase hit the floor and exploded into 100 jagged pieces. The sound cut through the party like a thunderclap, and every single person in that room turned to look at me. I stood frozen in the wreckage, my heart slamming against my ribs. $12,000. That's what Donna had said during the briefing. $12,000 if anyone damages the artwork. I didn't have $12,000. I barely had $2,000 in my savings account, and that was earmarked for certification courses. Donna came rushing over, her face pale with horror. She was already apologizing to the heir, to the guests, to anyone who would listen. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Then I heard his voice. "Everyone, please. It's only porcelain. Continue enjoying the evening." The crowd parted slightly, and I saw him for the first time. Theron Ashby, tall and silver-haired, wearing a simple charcoal suit that somehow looked more expensive than everyone else's formal wear. His face was calm, almost amused, as he walked toward me with measured steps. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, sir, I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the damage. I don't know how long it will take, but I'll cover every cent." He wasn't looking at my face. His eyes had dropped to my hands, still extended slightly from trying to catch the vase. My scarred hands, fully visible under the chandelier light. The calm drained from his expression. Something else replaced it. Something I couldn't identify. His lips parted slightly, and I watched the color leave his face like water draining from a sink. "Those scars," he said quietly. "Where did you get them?" The question caught me off guard. Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. "I've had them my whole life," I said. "Since I was a baby. I don't really know how." Theron Ashby stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached out and grabbed my arm, not violently but firmly. His grip was trembling. "Come with me," he said, "right now. There's something I need to show you." Every instinct I had screamed at me to pull away. A stranger was gripping my arm in the middle of his own party, asking me to follow him to some unknown location, and the rational part of my brain was listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. I didn't know this man. I didn't know what he wanted. I was a catering worker who had just destroyed his property, and now he was looking at me like I held the answer to a question he'd been asking for decades. But something in his eyes stopped me from refusing. It wasn't threat, it wasn't anger. It was desperation so raw and unguarded that it made my chest ache. This was a man who had just seen something impossible, and he needed to understand it as badly as I needed to understand why he cared about my scars. "Okay," I said. Theron released my arm but gestured for me to follow. We walked away from the shattered vase, away from the staring guests, away from Donna's horrified expression. The noise of the party faded behind us as we moved down a long corridor lined with paintings and old photographs. Our footsteps echoed against the marble floor. A man in a dark suit fell into step beside us. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a face that revealed nothing. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just walked alongside Theron like this was something they had rehearsed. "This is Boyd Cranston," Theron said without looking back. "He's been with me for 30 years. He knows everything." I didn't ask what everything meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know yet. We stopped at a set of heavy wooden doors. Theron pushed them open and led me into a private study. Dark wood paneling, leather armchairs, shelves filled with books that looked like they'd never been touched. A fire crackled in a stone hearth despite the mild October weather, but none of that held my attention. The far wall did. It was covered with photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in careful rows and clusters. A younger version of Theron appeared in many of them, his hair dark instead of silver, his face unlined by the years. Beside him in almost every image was a woman. Auburn hair, warm smile, eyes that seemed to catch the light even in still photographs. She was beautiful in a way that felt timeless, like she belonged to a different era, and in her arms, in photograph after photograph, was a baby. "My wife," Theron said. He had stopped beside me, his voice strained with the effort of speaking. "Vivian, and my son, Callum." I stared at the images. The baby was small and generic in the way all infants are. Round cheeks, wispy hair, tiny fists reaching toward the camera. I tried to see myself in that face and couldn't. It was just a baby. "What happened to them?" I asked. Theron was silent for a long moment. Boyd stood near the door, arms folded, watching us both. "There was a fire," Theron finally said. "Our home in Pennsylvania. I was traveling for business. Vivienne and Callum were alone. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was destroyed. They found Vivienne's remains in the wreckage." He paused, and I saw his hands clench at his sides. "But Callum's body was never recovered. The investigators said the fire burned too hot. They assumed nothing would have survived. I buried an empty casket next to my wife and tried to accept that my son was gone. Pennsylvania, fire, a child around 2 years old." The words landed like stones in my stomach. "But you didn't accept it," I said. "No." Theron turned to face me fully. "I hired private investigators. I spent 15 years and more money than I can calculate searching for any sign that Callum might have survived. And 2 years into that search, one of my investigators found something." Boyd stepped forward and handed Theron a folder. Theron opened it and pulled out a document, yellowed with age. A child matching Callum's description was left at a fire station in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, approximately 60 miles from where our home burned. No identification. Severe burns on both hands. The child was placed into foster care. Sealed records, a new name. The trail went cold, and I couldn't find him no matter how hard I tried. My mouth had gone dry. I couldn't speak. Theron reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph. It was old and creased from being handled countless times. He held it out to me, and I took it with trembling fingers. It showed an infant's hands wrapped in white bandages. Only the fingertips were visible, tiny and pink against the gauze. "This was taken in the hospital after the fire," Theron said. Callum grabbed a piece of burning debris trying to reach his mother. The doctors said his scarring would be permanent, distinctive, unlike anything they had seen before. He reached for my hands and turned them palm up. The scars caught the firelight, the same rippled texture I had looked at every day of my life. "Show me," he whispered. I held my hands next to the photograph. The infant's hands were tiny, the bandages covering everything. But the placement of the damage, the way the scarring wrapped around the thumbs, the pattern of the deepest burns near the base of the palms matched exactly. "I watched you get those scars," Theron said, his voice breaking. "I wasn't there, but I've seen them in my nightmares every night for 27 years. I looked at this man, this billionaire, this stranger who might be my father, and for the first time since I was a child, I felt tears sliding down my face. The question that had been building inside me finally broke free. If I'm your son, why was I abandoned? Why didn't anyone come looking for me?" Theron exchanged a glance with Boyd. Something passed between them, a silent communication built on decades of trust. Boyd nodded once and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the study. He produced a key from his pocket, unlocked the cabinet, and retrieved a leather folder. 2 years ago, we obtained access to records that had been sealed since the night you were found," Boyd explained. "Hospital intake documents from the fire station in Clearfield County. A judge finally granted us access after years of legal petitions." He handed the folder to Theron, who held it like it contained something fragile and dangerous. "What's in there?" I asked. Theron opened the folder slowly. Inside was a medical intake form dated October 1997. I could see the official stamps, the handwritten notes describing a male child approximately 2 years old with severe burns on both hands. No identification, no parents present. Found at fire station entrance at approximately 3 in the morning. But attached to the medical form was something else. A single sheet of paper, handwritten, the ink faded but still legible. Theron held it out to me. "Read it." I took the paper. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like it had been written by someone exhausted or injured or both. The words made my blood turn cold. His name is Callum. His father is Theron Ashby. Theron doesn't know what I've done. Please protect my son. Tell no one. If Theron finds out the truth, he will destroy himself. I set the fire. I couldn't escape what I became. But Callum can. Let him be someone new. Let him be free. V. I read it 3 times. The words refused to arrange themselves into anything that made sense. V, I said. Vivienne, your wife? Yes. She set the fire. Theron closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears he wasn't trying to hide. Vivienne struggled after Callum was born. Postpartum depression, the doctors called it. But it became something darker, something I didn't recognize until it was too late. She refused treatment. She pushed me away. I was traveling constantly, building the company, telling myself that she just needed time. I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. His voice cracked, and he paused to steady himself. The fire investigator ruled it an electrical accident, faulty wiring in an old house. I never questioned the finding. I blamed myself for not being there that night. I never once imagined that Vivienne could have done it deliberately. Boyd spoke quietly from his position near the cabinet. Based on the timeline we've reconstructed, Mrs. Ashby started the fire, then experienced a moment of clarity. She got Callum out of the house and drove him to the fire station. She left him there with the note and drove away. Her body was found a mile from the station. The official report assumed she had somehow been ejected from the house during the fire's collapse. No one investigated further. I felt sick. The room seemed to tilt around me, and I grabbed the edge of Theron's desk to keep myself upright. My mother tried to kill us both. Then she saved me. Then she died alone on a dark road while I waited at a fire station for someone to find me. "Why didn't you put out a public search?" I asked. "Why didn't you release my name and photograph to the media?" Theron's voice was barely audible. "Because I believed my son was dead. The investigators told me there was no body because the fire burned too hot to leave remains. I accepted it. I buried an empty casket beside my wife and mourned you both. I mourned you for 27 years, Callum. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He stepped forward and took my scarred hands in his own. His grip was firm but gentle, the hands of a man who had spent decades building things with careful precision. "I need to know for certain," he said. "I believe you're my son. Everything tells me you are, but I need proof that neither of us can doubt. Will you take a DNA test?" I looked at this man who might be my father. I saw decades of grief etched into the lines of his face. I saw hope fighting against the fear of disappointment. I saw a man who had never stopped searching for a son the world told him was dead. And I saw myself in 30 years if I walked away without knowing the truth. "Yes," I said, "I'll take the test." 3 days later, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. The laboratory had promised results within 72 hours. When the email arrived, I couldn't bring myself to open it for almost an hour. Finally, I clicked. The result was 99.98% paternity match. Declan Morse, the abandoned foster kid with no past and no family, was Callum Theron Ashby. I was the missing son of a billionaire. I was the child everyone believed had died in a fire 27 years ago. I was not nobody. I had never been nobody. I sat in my cold apartment and wept until I had nothing left. The weeks following the DNA confirmation didn't transform my life the way you might expect. I still woke up in my one-bedroom apartment. I still drove my 12-year-old Honda to work. I still supervised the loading dock at Granger Furniture Distribution, moving sofas and bed frames while my coworkers talked about football and weekend plans. But something inside me had shifted. The hollow space that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember didn't ache anymore. It was filling slowly with something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Belonging. Theron and I agreed to take things slow. Neither of us knew how to be father and son after 27 years of separation. We couldn't just pick up where we left off because there was no where we left off. I was a toddler when I disappeared from his life. He was a stranger when he walked into mine. Our first real conversation happened at a diner, halfway between Columbus and the Ashby estate. Neutral territory. Theron ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. I ordered pancakes because I had no idea what else to do with my hands. "I don't expect you to call me Dad," Theron said. "I don't expect anything from you, Callum, Declan, whatever name feels right to you." "Declan," I said. "That's who I've been for most of my life. I'm not ready to let go of that." He nodded slowly. "Declan, then, I just want the chance to know you, whatever that looks like. However long it takes." "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I've never had a father, not a real one." Theron wrapped his hands around his untouched coffee cup. "I don't know how to do this either. I've spent 27 years being a father to a ghost. Talking to you, sitting across from you, watching you breathe is more than I ever thought I would have again, so we'll figure it out together." We started with weekly dinners. Phone calls that were awkward at first, filled with long silences and false starts. But gradually, the silences became comfortable. The conversations became real. He asked about my life, my work, my friends, my dreams. He didn't try to fix anything or offer money or sweep me into his world of wealth and privilege. He just listened. I told Pauline everything. She sat on her porch swing while I explained about the party, the vase, the scars, the DNA test, all of it. When I finished, she was crying, but not from sadness. "I always knew you were meant for something, Declan," she said. "I never knew what. Now I understand. You were meant to find your way home." I hugged her for a long time. She'd given me a home when no one else would. She had loved me when I believed I was unlovable. Finding Theron didn't erase what she meant to me. If anything, it made me appreciate her more. I finished my HVAC certification 3 months later. Not because I needed the money anymore. Theron had already made it clear that I would never want for anything financially. But I needed to complete what I had started. I needed to prove to myself that I could build something with my own hands, even now that I knew where those hands came from. Theron came to the graduation ceremony. He sat in the back row of a community college auditorium, surrounded by working-class families and blue-collar dreams. He wore a simple jacket instead of his usual expensive suits. And when they called my name, he clapped louder than anyone else in the room. Afterward, he shook my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." 3 words. They broke something open inside me that I didn't know was still closed. I think about my mother sometimes. Vivian, the woman who gave birth to me, tried to kill me, saved me, and died alone on a dark road while I waited for someone to find me. I don't know how to feel about her. I probably never will. She was sick in ways nobody understood at the time. She made an unforgivable choice and then made a miraculous one. Both things are true. I have to carry them together. The scars on my hands used to feel like a burden, evidence of something terrible that happened to me before I could remember. A mark of abandonment, a question with no answer. Now I see them differently. They are proof that I survived. They are the reason Theron recognized me across a crowded room 27 years after he lost me. They are the map that led me home. My name is Declan Morse. It is also Callum Ashby. For 27 years I thought I was nobody. I thought I came from nowhere. I thought the hollow space inside me would never be filled. I was wrong about all of it. If you're watching this and you feel like nobody is looking for you, like you don't matter, like your past is a locked door with no key, I want you to hear me. Your story isn't over. The answers you're searching for might be searching for you too. And sometimes the scars you carry aren't just damage, they're proof that you survived long enough to find the truth. Don't give up. Keep going. Your turning point might be one broken vase away. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, join this family so you never miss another video. Click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next story drops. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for reminding me that none of us are really alone. I'll see you in the next one.